Here's Trevinko. Lovely ball through towards Altidore. Altidore! Toronto FC's big acquisitions combine to tie the game. Josie Altidore.
The Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie. The award-winning soccer podcast that covers every single aspect of Canadian soccer. And now, without further ado, here's Duane Rollins.
And welcome to the Two Solitudes podcast. Here on It's Still Winter, Kevin. It's still winter. Why is it still winter? It's not officially still winter, but it's still winter. Why?
Minus freaking 15 this morning. Minus 20 yesterday. I can't take it anymore. I can't stand it. Book me on a flight. Bring me somewhere warm because I'm about to go crazy over here.
Hashtag we are not winter. Okay. Anyway, we have a good show.
F winter.
Exactly. Yeah, moving on. Today's show, we're going to have our Canadian review as we always do, but this is going to be a show that's a little bit more about the lower levels, and that includes an initiative that we're launching today that we'll tell you a bit about in our second segment. We're going to talk to Steven Sandor from the 11.ca, from Plastic Pitch, the editor there. He, of course, is involved with the Edmonton Eddies, the FC Edmonton broadcast crew. He's going to preview the Eddies and the NASL for us today. So this will be our NASL preview show. In addition, Kevin and I are going to come out. He had an opportunity to talk to some people involved with the Ottawa Fury, including who are you talking to, Kevin?
Marc Dos Santos, on his last trip in Montreal when he faced the FC Montreal. So on the Ottawa side of things, I had a chance to look at them play and to talk to Marc Dos Santos and his thoughts on his squad that he have right now.
So Kevin is going to share us that. And we'll have a talk about the Fury there. So this is going to be an NASL heavy show. We're also going to talk a little bit about the future of the NASL in Canada, whether it's the way to go. I don't have any updates on the league, guys. I told you that a couple weeks ago. It's stuck looking for money, and they're looking in different directions right now, and that's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. And we're going to talk about what the right way forward is, what the future of the NASL is, and that's going to segue us into our special topic, what we're launching today, and that's a USL show, because there are now 3 pro teams in the USL. The USL is a primary development league for the Canadian MLS teams. It's going to be a major focus of ours, so much so that we're doing what, Kevin?
USL Radio.
Yeah, we're doing another podcast, guys, and that might mean we're crazy. Does it mean we're crazy, Kevin?
Somebody told me yesterday, actually, was Sam Gregory, asked me if I ever looked at what's the record for the amount of podcasts by one person in a week. I think we're getting close to it, Duane.
All right, well, we're going to tell you about that initiative in our middle segment after we talk about the NASL, and then we'll wrap it up with the Canadian Review. Until such time, we'll take a little quick break here, bring Sandor on the line, and we'll talk about the NASL.
Friendly city. From the mayor to the people, the city has great hospitality. It's safe and so bright you can walk late.
And welcome back to the Two Solitudes podcast, our NASL preview here. We have Steven Sandor from Plastic Pitch magazine, the 11.ca. Lots of great stuff. Steve's also involved with the Eddies out in Edmonton, and he's good for him to join us in an early morning in Edmonton today. So how you doing, Steve?
No, not so early morning. I've got 2 kids. Early morning is like 6:30.
All right, fair enough. It's early for me because I'm lazy. But at any rate, let's start with the Eddies. They had a really interesting year last year in the sense that they had the disappointment of the Voyageurs Cup, and then that was coupled with, I would have to say, a really disappointing spring season, but then they came alive in the second half of the year and almost nicked a playoff spot. Are they going to build off that, or is it going to be another up-and-down season?
No, I think now this is a very different sort of scenario for FC Edmonton in the sense that, and I get the sense talking to other writers league-wide too, that this is a team that's expected to be one of the power teams in the league now this year. You take a look, not just the fact that the Eddies didn't lose anything after that great run they went, probably from the end of July on. They didn't lose the home game. And they weren't drawing games either. They were just win, 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 win. And as you said, in the combined standings, they went from being in the wilderness to being right down to the playoff race to the last couple of weekends of the season, because they just reeled in a whole bunch of teams and passed them. This year they didn't lose any of those key pieces. They still are going to go in with the best goalkeeping in the league, the best back line in the league. And just that ability, if they can score a couple of goals a game, if they can find it, they're going to be fine. So I think the feeling around the league is that this is there might not be quite as ranked as high as Minnesota, but certainly when you talk about that second group of teams that you would say are competing for the NASL title, Cosmos, San Antonio, and Tampa, and them, I think they're in that conversation.
Steve, I've said before many times, with apologies to the Fury fans, that the Eddies are kind of everyone in Canada's second favorite team. They might even be the second favorite team of Fury fans. I don't know. But everyone kind of worries about their long-term stability in terms of the off-the-pitch stuff. Can you really touch on that and tell us whether there's any more stability there, any more fan interest and media interest?
I wish I could say that the season tickets were sold out, and that all the papers were running giant full-page NASL preview supplements, but they're not. The team is based on a lot of economics. That's based on hope, where the team's budget is and where the team is at. And Tom Fass has said this publicly to me several times now, who's one of the co-owners of FC Edmonton, with his brother Dave. That the teams break even because it really has no major sponsorship deal, which is a frustration. Is about 8,500 fans a game. That's how he puts it into bums and seats. Now Clark Stadium, you're saying it only holds 4,500 people. The city of Edmonton and FC Edmonton have an agreement that if the Eddies can sell out Clark Stadium on a regular basis, then the city will look at either expanding or helping them find a new stadium. But that only happens if they're selling out the stadium, which they're not doing. They've only sold out a couple times in, I think, the last few years, and those were for early season games against the likes of the Cosmos and such. So obviously the whole economics of the team are based on hope. They're based on the hope that, yes, they're going to get to 4,500 so that they can expand the stadium, so they can eventually get to the point where there might be a 10,000-seat stadium where they can get the 8,500 fans a game. That will have to break even. That shows you how far this team is away from breaking even, and the kind of sacrifices the Fast brothers have put into trying to make soccer work at Edmonton, and making soccer work probably outside of the three biggest cities. It's a massive commitment, and I think it sets an example for the kind of commitment we need from owners if we're going to make professional soccer work in Canada, because it's going to take time to sort of hammer away at all the cynics. And a lot of you have to make it work in a facility that's probably not the best for you, which is the situation with Clark Stadium right now. So a lot of those factors work against them, but I think it shows you the wall that they're up against. And the biggest frustration is the lack of a big corporate sponsor to come forward and put the name on the jersey and sort of take that in. And let's face it, the oil industry's in a downturn right now, but it wasn't in the 3 years previous. And it's a little bit, I'd say, disappointing that you couldn't find one of the major oil companies that would be willing to throw their names on the front of the shirt. I get it now that everything's being cut back, but over the last few years, I'm surprised that with the economy being so strong in Alberta, that there wasn't someone who stepped forward and said, yeah, this is good for the community. We'll sponsor this team.
Last year, Edmonton had a very difficult calendar to start their spring season, playing a lot more on the road than at home, and eventually created a gap that they had difficulty to overcome to make the playoffs. Do you think it's going to be the same thing this year? And do you think that's a story for an Edmonton team to play more away at the beginning of the season because of the climate?
No, it's actually the other way around this year because of the Women's World Cup. Edmonton, just like Ottawa, they have to clear out by the end of May, meaning the schedule is they play the first game on the road, and then I believe the next 5 of 6 are at home. And it's almost like they're playing their entire home schedule in a row early in the season. And with that home record, and again, going back to last year, that after July, I think they went 8 undefeated. I think 7 wins, 1 draw. I might be wrong. It might be 6 wins, 1 draw. That they went, and now around the league, people know that this place is a fortress. And I think what the Eddies are looking at this year is with all those home games early, especially in April when you can still get snow on the ground, where it can still be pretty unforgiving with the wind and the cold, that the Eddies are somewhat used to. With the Southeast teams coming in, that the Eddies could actually build a big lead in the standings and say, okay, everyone come and chase us, because we might go on a 4 or 5 game tear in April and May, and be able to put some distance between us and the rest of the pack. I'm sure that's the way they're looking at it, that they're going to have a major ability to not have to leave Edmonton outside of maybe a trip to Ottawa for a Voyageurs Cup game for about a month and a half. And I think that's going to be a real big advantage for them this year. And I think the league, if you look at their schedule, the Eddies hardly play at home in the summer. It's almost as the league is listening to the Eddies and some of the fans saying that, look, if you're going to allow Carolina to play at home in July in 35 degrees Celsius heat, in San Antonio same way with the heat and humidity, then you have to afford the Canadian teams the ability to play at home in April and October, where they get some bit of a weather advantage, where it's going to be like, okay, American teams, come on up. And, it's been proven, at least economically, the strongest crowds for the Eddies come in September and October or in April and May. And it bears out some of the numbers we see from studies. Canadian fans don't like to go to sporting events in July, June, and August. It's when they go to the cottage. It's when they go to they go away for weekends. You don't want to be playing at home in those months. And as well, we talk about, the soccer fan that misses his buddy's wedding, because he goes to the game. And, the reason we talk about that person is because that person is 1 in a million. 999,999 of us go to the wedding. And those are the kind of things that happen in the summer: cottages, weddings, vacations. So, it's a better schedule for the Eddies this year. And I think attendance-wise, it should be better, too, with so many spring and fall games rather than summer games.
What do you think do the Eddie needs to do bring that attendance up, to create the buzz? There was a lot of controversy in Montreal last couple of months because of a lack of buzz, and then some results on the pitch created the buzz that was never seen in Montreal in the world of soccer. What do you think the Eddies do need? Do they need a big name? Do they need a recognizable figure? Do they need a superstar that's known around the world? What do the Eddies need to create that buzz, Stephen?
I think if they had a Canadian star, now that the rumors, not rumors, because I spoke with Julian on Friday when he was here at Edmonton for the kit launch for the Canadian team, and him saying now that, I'm talking to two NASL teams, and everyone's on their radars. What are the 2 NASL teams Julian's negotiating with right now? If they were to get a named Canadian national team player, it would mean a lot more than a European. I think I think if they could make that breakthrough, I think there's been a lot said. We've all seen it on Twitter and on the message boards about Benito Floro and the lack of NASL call-ups. But I think being able to establish that and sell that to people, as well, a few months ago, the Edmonton Eskimos released a really interesting study, and I'm just wondering if it carries across. And it goes back to that, we're talking about the sociology of Canadians. We're very, in terms of following sports, and we're finding that we're very different than Americans. And unfortunately, we tend to be in American leagues, so we get pushed schedule-wise to ways that to American thinking. But this study the Eskimos did that showed that only 8% of their fans said that they would want to watch anything on a Sunday sports. So Sundays aren't for sports; they're for going away again, having family time. And of course, because of the States, we have this sort of image in our heads that Sunday is a big sports day. When Canadians, in fact, like the people in the survey said, we would much rather go on a Friday night or Thursday night to watch a sporting event than on a Sunday afternoon. It's that battle between television scheduling and what's good for fans. I honestly think that if the Eddies could get home games on Friday nights instead of Sunday afternoons, they would probably bump, I don't know how many in the seats, but they would lose the TV deal because there would be no television interest in getting their games on Sundays at 2 o'clock, which is our normal start time, is a nice sweet spot. And again, I have to declare my conflict here because obviously I do work on the television broadcasts. That Sundays at 2 is a sweet spot for for the broadcaster to put the games on, and the ratings have been good. And the Eddie's ratings, TV ratings, have been stronger than most NASL teams. They've been at it a lot longer too, in terms of having a real sort of TV deal, which they continue the second part of their 2-year deal with Rogers and City TV. So this is, it's a bit of a complex thing. I think every group of soccer supporters deals with it. That idea of why is this game starting at this time, and then going, oh, TV. That's why, and I think, at some point, teams will have to decide what's more important. But I think the Sunday at 2 doesn't necessarily help the Eddies. I don't think it's the world's greatest start time for a team, not in the Canadian marketplace. I think that the studies have shown that we're not that big on watching sports that way. And I think if we talked to more Canadians and surveyed them about when they actually like to go to stadiums, we'd have a lot more sporting events on Thursday and Friday evenings and a lot less on the weekends.
For those American listeners out there that aren't aware, Friday nights is the CFL, basically in Western Canada. Friday Night Football, TSN's branded that for years, so you'd be up against it there for sure. If we could turn it real quickly, Stephen, for one question on the other Canadian team in this. I know you cover the league wide, and you know it quite well. What are your thoughts on the Fury this season?
The Fury, my big thing with them is I look at them a little bit like the Eddies a couple of years ago, where they've got some interesting parts, but I just don't see where the goals are coming from. I don't know what they're going to do up front. I think that was a bit of a struggle for them, especially in the second half of last year. The ability to find goals, and I mean it takes time. I mean the Eddies, they struggled at it until the end of July, for 2.5 years. Until the end of July last year, where things started clicking and they started getting goals by committee. I think the Fury have some very nice pieces in the back. I like some of the pieces they have in midfield. I mean, I think Richie Ryan's a very good player. Be interesting to see what Patterson does, fully or healthy. I like a lot of the workhorse mentality of the team. And they certainly have had some very, very good games against the Eddies in the last year. But I just think that they need to find a couple of dynamic players on the offensive side to sort of push them into that group where they can maybe compete for a playoff spot. Is that player still out there? I don't know. And again, there's still players who are in play and guys that are out there that are available. But we'll see what it brings for them.
Steve, I want to turn to the stateside to end the interview. A couple different points I wanted to bring up. There are a couple teams, Minnesota being most likely, that are really making that push for MLS at this point. I think San Antonio might be thinking that way as well. From that perspective, does that put them at a different level? And do you think even further to that, they're going to make a big run or try to make a big run in the U.S. Open Cup this year, or do you think they're going to be focused on the league?
I think Minnesota is deep enough that they can go both ways. I mean, this team is very good, and honestly, and I say this to people, NASL to MLS is a lot like the championship to the Premiership, in the sense that you would look at a couple of the top teams in championships who are in the promotion battle, and then look at a couple teams in the Premiership and the relegation battle, and you would say, are those teams in the championship better than those relegation teams right now? Well, maybe they would, maybe better. They might be deeper. When you look at those teams at the top of one group and at the bottom of the next level up, I feel very strongly about Minnesota. I think that lineup now beats Chicago like 8 out of 10 games. Like, they're a better team. Like, right now, we're not talking they're going to be a better team down the road. You look at the players on Minnesota, and again, I talked just about Chicago because I used an example of a team that's off to a very poor start and looks to be quite poor at the MLS level, but. I think if Minnesota played an MLS with the lineup they had right now, if they said, on the Wednesday press conference that's scheduled now, that we're hearing is scheduled, that if they said, come on, Minnesota United, come on up to MLS, tomorrow, they wouldn't struggle so much. And I think people are recognizing that Minnesota put together something special, and this team is ready to really make an impact on the North American scene. I wish them all the best. I mean, they're a great organization, a group of very, very classy individuals, and I think that MLS is making the right choice by going with the Minnesota United group rather than the Vikings group. I think you go with established people who have a track record, who have won things in NASL, who have shown that they're one of the classy organizations in the league and treat players right. And I think with that track record, I think that transition will be cool. I just hope their jerseys will look as cool when they move to MLS as they do now.
That's important from the marketing perspective. It really is. Talk about Orlando.
Well, it has 3 stripes on it, right? So it has 3 stripes on. So maybe they'll be okay if with the new boss. So.
There you go. Well, people just still talk about Orlando and the purple. I don't really get it. I'm not a big purple guy, but people love it. Stephen, I want to end it with the Cosmos because I don't think you can have an NASL conversation without talking about the New York Cosmos because they're a very divisive team. They split opinions in a lot of ways. There's a lot of American fans in particular that view them as the great beacon of hope in their particular pet cause, and sort of their philosophies. There's other people that look at them as kind of a sideshow. What is your perspective on the Cosmos, and are they good for the NASL?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that that they are they're good for the league. They're very, very aggressive. I think they push the owners to be a little more, shall we say, loosening up the purse strings because you're going to have to compete with them. So this is I think a very they create a very interesting dynamic. I think the frustrations, if there are any, I don't think there are much. The Cosmos, when they travel, it's like dealing with a first-level professional team. They travel with their entourage. All their media people come with them. They are the most professional club. They get there a day earlier than any other team does in terms of getting on the road. They prepare. I think the frustration comes from the fact that maybe the Cosmos, it feels like they punch above their weight. Let's face it, in year 2 of their existence last year, they weren't drawing the numbers to Hofstra University that they were in the first year. They were drawing, $5-6 grand a game, $4,500 sometimes. And I think the feeling is that for a team that's, not drawing super well, that they're acting like they're the biggest thing in New York, bigger than NYCFC or the Red Bulls. And that, I think, rubs some people the wrong way. But I also see that they're a team that has no limit on the purse strings. So they're one of those teams that just don't seem to right now care very much about where their balance sheet is at. They're going to go out and they're going to be aggressive for players.
Is it sustainable, Stephen? Is the New York Cosmos model right now, is it sustainable in the future?
I used to question this myself because I think it's on the European level. I used to question if it was sustainable, but I think that there are going to be a select group of people who are going to be in the sports game now, and they have no care whatsoever if they make a dime. They're doing it for vanity. The question is when those people get tired or want to switch it over, and someone else buys it. So, what was the Cosmos if they went onto the market and someone else had to buy it? What would a team losing that kind of money, generate? But, you can ask that question, the same question about Chelsea. If Roman Abramovich decides to sell a team and someone who decides the bottom line is important buys it, they're going to gut that team the next day because it's, not sustainable. So you at every different level, you can ask that question. But I think at the same time, the league needs them. They're the most high-profile team. It's, if you ask anyone in Edmonton, name one other team in NASL, 9 of 10 of them are going to say New York Cosmos first. So I think that's really important to the NASL to have that team survive. Where that sort of puts NASL in terms of its relationships with MLS and USL and other leagues. I think obviously it's always put them at that adversarial position. I think that's part and parcel. Let's face it, the Cosmos at one time thought they were going to go to MLS and had petitioned for it. Let's not have revisionist history here where some people, and I think we go back to what Duane was saying about how the Cosmos represent some people's pet causes. I think a lot of them conveniently forget that the Cosmos did want to go to MLS and into single entity at one time, or at least looked at that league. So I think that the Cosmos will always be a dividing thing. I think that's great. You need to have that in soccer. You need to have heroes. You need to have villains. If every team was just sort of well-liked, you'd get 15 of the 20 teams in MLS. I think MLS needs to work on that, where they have to have teams that are more color, not necessarily spend more or go nuts on the salary cap, but just to have some more unique characteristics among the clubs so we can develop some real sort of dislikes and likes amongst them. And I think that should be a goal for that league. I think the Cosmos were there already.
One of my old partners in crime, Ben Knight, used to talk about how MLS was just a bunch of different McDonald's franchises with different strips on playing each other. You're absolutely right. Some color and some difference is needed. I think NYCFC adds a lot to MLS for many of those same reasons. The villain. We need the villain. Steve, one quick question, and then tell the listeners how they can get a hold of Plastic Pitch, the great initiative that you have there. The quick question is this: if I had to force you to make a prediction for who's going to be standing in the confetti at the end of the year in the championship today, and it's really early, but if I had to do that, who would that be?
I'm gonna go on a limb and say the final right now would be, in my mind, would be Minnesota and Edmonton in the final. So it's going to be cold in November. There'll probably be an orange ball on the field. And the so-called Southeast League and the NASL will have the two northern teams going for it. Minnesota's extremely strong, and they're going to be angry about what happened last year, losing in the playoffs after dominating the league for two sessions. That I think they're going to be out for blood. The only question with Minnesota might be goalkeeping. Everywhere else, they are so ridiculously complete. As I said, week in, week out, they're deeper than a few MLS teams. And they're the team to beat.
And how do people get a hold of Plastic Pitch?
The Plastic Pitch, you can get it. Just search Plastic Pitch at the Apple Store or through Google Play. You can get it for your tablets or devices there. If you'd like to get it, I make it also available as an email PDF document. I know some people don't like to read on the tablet. And as well, you can subscribe even if you have tablets this way through our Shopify store. Just go to Shopify and search Plastic Pitch, and you'll find our store, and you can order the magazine directly through there. As well, you get a free time preview, so if you don't want to pay for it yet and you want to check it out first, download the app for free, and you can preview the issues before you decide whether or not you want to spend the money or not.
All right, great. Stephen Sandor, a man with many hats on. He's also a magazine editor up there in Alberta, so we thank him for his time today.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for listening to the Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast with Kevin Laramie and Duane Rollins. You can reach the guys on Twitter at 24th Minute and at Kevin Laramie, or both of them at Two Solitudes Pod. Reach the guys on email, twosolitudespodcast@gmail.com, but especially subscribe on Stitcher Radio. Now back to the show.
Yeah, welcome back. Thanks again to Steve for joining us. He's a busy guy. He does wear about 50 different hats up there, so we do thank him for his time. Kevin, you had a chance to talk to MDS this past weekend. How was that?
Actually, really funny. He's always happy when he comes back to Montreal. He has a relationship with all the journalists, with everybody. Before the game, he comes and says hi to the bench. He talks a minute with Philippe Lafroy, which is the coach of the FC Montreal and director of the academy. So it's always a great atmosphere to have Ottawa back to Montreal, even for a preseason game, which was a really hard-fought game. You can read my game report on CSN. But it was very interesting to see how he feels about his squad. He's happy that he had basically his entire full squad for the last 5 weeks of training camp, which wasn't the case last year. Last year he was receiving players almost on a weekly basis up until the start of the season, which is not the case this year. He has a great squad, and let me tell you, Duane, one defender called Rafael Alves for Ottawa, a Brazilian, really captured my attention. He's huge, he's big, he's talented, he's skilled, and the way Dos Santos organizes him in Portuguese on the sideline cannot be understated. That's going to be important because it's a little bit of it's going to sound cliche, that different language might affect it, but yeah, it might have an effect eventually. And the way that he just commands respect, his presence on the back line is very intimidating. And looking at the difference of the size with the FC Montreal player, which are really small, but we'll talk about that later on USL Radio, but he was able to use that size advantage, and it might be overrated, the size advantage, you're going to tell me, but he's so imposing that he just commands respect, and watching him on the pitch is really interesting, right?
Fair enough, yeah. And Ottawa was already kind of strong at the back, and Stevens touched on that in his interview. I think that the question with Ottawa, as it was last year and it should be this year as well, is the front line. Now, people that are TFC fans that listen to this may laugh at what I'm about to say, but they added Andrew Wiedemann in here, and Andrew Wiedemann is a guy that he's a borderline NASL, MLS kind of up and downer. If you could move between the two leagues, he would.
He's the one who scored the goal, by the way, at the 22nd of the first half of the game. So he scored the goal, the lone goal of the game.
Yeah, so get your greatest finisher of the modern era jokes out of the way, folks, because at the NAS level, I think Wiedemann might be a really key addition.
Absolutely. One other quick note, Duane. I mentioned it on my report again. The Ottawa Fury are looking for a name, in quote, a big name. They're really close to signing a big name. I wish I could say that it is the Guzman or all the rumors that have been out there. I don't know who it is, but let me tell you something. They're looking for someone. And you should have seen the grin on his face when he said that, Duane, which says everything and nothing at the same time.
Yeah, it's funny. I wonder what de Guzman would be the obvious choice there. He is looking for a team. He's had some trials with some MLS teams. I'm sure that if the money was equatable, Julian's made enough money in his life. He's actually a guy that owns a lot of property in Toronto, too. So I don't think he's hurting from that side of things. As long as he can sort of be playing and get ready and prepare for the Gold Cup, I think he'll be happy. The other name that hasn't been rumored or that I haven't heard, and we assume he's retired. We assume he's retired, but
that's what I thought about. I had a feeling it was D-Row, but who knows? The name wasn't mentioned at all, but that's what I've had fitting for.
God knows. Because if you would think, here's my thing about Di Rosario, and I did want to have a TFC conversation with here. TFC wants to honor him, wants to do a big thing over him, want to put his name up on the wall. They want to sort of finally put a Band-Aid over that and heal it completely so that they can move on. I think that they would be very eager to make these kind of announcements. They would be very eager to have a big deal press conference where he announces retirement. So why has that not happened? Why is he just quietly off in the distance? Maybe it has to do with an NASL talk. You know what, and you can tell I'm kind of like excited by the possibility. I think that it would be great for him to end on his own terms, and if he goes to Ottawa and lights it up, you never know. An MLS team might take a look at him for the second half of the year. So
let's get this straight. Season tickets are going well in Ottawa right now. They're expecting to have the same amount, if not more. I heard that it's very close to about 4,000, and they're going to get more. And with a name like D-Row, it could bump it up really easily to a 7,000. I don't think de Guzman could do that. So when he said a name, maybe D-Row has a bigger name than de Guzman.
It'd be very interesting for sure. We have a lot to talk about there. I do think Don Garber was talking about MLS expansion and how he feels that the U.S. and Canada could support more teams. And it was the first time I've heard him say Canada again in relation to expansion. And I have a sneaky feeling, and I know people think I'm crazy when I say this, that Ottawa is still, although way down the list, a possibility for, a 28-29 MLS expansion. Like I'm talking about not 2028-29. I'm talking about the 28th or 29th, kind of that level team coming in.
With the stadium they have, Duane, I wouldn't be surprised. A 24-seat stadium, about 24,000 seater right now they have at TD Place. If that could be really, and it is designed for soccer eventually. So who knows what can happen there.
Yeah, that's absolutely why I think they're in the mix. That and they're highly professional at the top. They have guys that it's a really technical team. They have that, and if they can build the fan base like a Sacramento, like a Minnesota out there, to sort of add that aspect to it, and maybe a D-Row signing, even if he is at the end, can create that excitement. They've done another initiative this week that I thought was really interesting. That they're opening up the free tickets to those under 14 who are new teams in the region, so they're going to get them out there. That's a really smart initiative for a team like that. It's a family-friendly kind of thing. It's not supporters-related relations. I think the supporters groups are doing quite fine in Ottawa. Mm-hmm. But to add to that base by, you get a 14-year-old, or 13-year-old in, I guess, because it's under 14. They're going to have to bring mom and dad to the games, and mom and dad have to pay the tickets, right? So it's not completely, without some financial possibilities there too. And dad might buy a beer and a hot dog and for the kids, and might buy a
jersey and a hat and a soccer ball and whatever, yeah.
And maybe when kid turns 16 or 17 or 18 and he's been going to games for years, he might join one of those supporters groups. So I think it's a really smart initiative that the Fury did this week as well. So I look forward to watching the Ottawa games. I'm going to get the NASL live package fired up here soon, and I'll be adding some more time in front of the computer because I don't spend enough there right now.
Exactly. That was the point, the talking point too. Somebody asked me, how do I fit all those podcasts in a week? Well, I had 1 hour left, so we decided to do USL Radio.
Yeah, exactly. And that's we'll talk about that in a minute. I did quickly want to look at the NASL thing, and I wonder. I do think that there is a real important place for the lower divisions to play in Canadian soccer right now. And as I said on a couple shows ago, I think it was last show, I can't be a truther all the time about the Canadian League. It is something that we need to consciously be developing and working towards. I think that the way guys like Dino Rossi in Ontario are doing it right now, where they're building those regional leagues like the PLSQ in Quebec, hopefully BC gets it going soon. I think that's the model that we need to build and grow strong. And then eventually, maybe a decade down the line, there's enough grassroots support for those teams that you can then talk about merging them in some real way. That, to me, is the vision that's going to get you there. That's not me giving up on the dream of a Canadian League, because I believe very strongly in that. And if someone wants to sweep in tomorrow with Bell or Rogers or whoever and drop $50 million into someone's pocket to build this thing, then great. But until that happens, if we have to build it organically, it's going to have to start with having these pockets of support develop and having an NASL team in Ottawa and Edmonton and having those teams grow, and maybe one of them might get to move up one day. Having the Canadian MLS teams continue to be successful and develop the kids at the USL level, this is the key. So I wonder, Kevin, having watched a week one of TFC2 play this past week, having seen sort of what this means and what it looks like and how exciting the game was, and we're going to talk a bit about this, is maybe just trying to get more USL teams and more NASL teams the way to go at this point, and putting the league on the back burner. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's better to do this than to just sit around and wait for the league to magically appear. At least by having new teams and new leagues, you're having people watching soccer that's Canadian-made with a very big contingent of Canadian players on the pitch, which in theory is almost the same as you would get with the league. The only difference is it's the amount of team is a little lower and there's some quotas, but it's not 100% Canadian, even though Montreal is 100% composed of academy product. The same thing can be said for a lot of those new two teams that appeared in USL this year. So it does beat the status quo by far, because right now we're seeing about 3 Canadian teams with majority of Canadian content appear just this year. And that's without saying if CSA is happy with what the Canadian USL team does this year, who knows, maybe they'll change their stance on granting new accreditation for in quotes D2, D3 teams in Canada. That could help other pockets of fan example. I don't know, a Calgary or a team that doesn't have a USL, an ASL, or MLS presence at the moment. So for right now, I think it's the best for short term, because you're getting Canadian players on pitch and they're getting fan support on top of it. So yeah, it's better than just doing nothing.
Yeah, we saw this past weekend, TFC was the only one that launched at the USL level, and they did in fact exceed the 6-11 starter quota that they had. So there was no issue there. They did play some non-Canadians, but they supplemented the roster, and I think we all recognize that that's not necessarily a bad thing, so long as the majority of players are Canadian. I'm talking about development perspective here on a national team, on a player pool level rather than an MLS level. It's a different discussion that we'll have on a different show. Montreal, as you know, having had a conversation with them, their approach is probably the most extreme, and they are totally focused on a complete academy kind of graduate team. Correct, Kevin?
Absolutely. The same team that played in the PDL the last couple of months graduated to USL, an average of 20 years old, one of the youngest team in the league. 100% academy product, as you'll be able to listen to Philippe Lafroy on USL Radio a little later, director of the academy and coach of the USL team FC Montreal. He's something that he's really proud of too, Duane. That Montreal is 100% composed of academy kids, and it gives them an outlet to be able to be challenged, because you all know that they've been coasting easily. Not coasting, but been dominating the last couple of years in the PDL, and they needed a new challenge. And it is going to be a challenge, and it's going to be interesting to see how they grow in that challenge, how they become actual professional soccer player at the end of it. So yeah, it's going to be good.
All right. We'll see what Vancouver does. I'm not saying they're not going to do it. We'll see what they does. I think that the key, if the CSA allowed for standalone USL teams to come forth, I think that the key would have to be that it would have to be regionally placed, so they're not everywhere, so that you're still allowing those regional leagues that I spoke of to develop, because I think they're vital to create the streamline up. But obviously need the quotas in there. They absolutely would need a 6-11 quota. It would absolutely have to be development focused. You would absolutely need to have these teams be recognizing that developing the next generation of Canadian players to get them to a higher level is the more important, the more worthwhile goal than simply winning a USL title down the line. And I don't, having watched this past weekend and having looked at the teams that are how the MLS2 teams did, and we'll talk more about this in the show. I don't think you can necessarily. I don't think you're giving up on winning if you're going young, because the talent level, the ceiling level is higher on the young kids. And by the end of the year, once they harden themselves a little bit, yep. I think a 2 team is going to win the USL title this year. So I don't know which 2 team it's going to be. Maybe Seattle. Seattle, I think, has put a lot of purpose into winning. But I do in LA as well. The Monarchs in LA, they played to a 0-0 this week. I think that there was a lot of excitement in that game as well. So we'll see. This brings us to a nice segue into what we're doing. We mentioned it a couple times now. We're debuting USL Radio today. USL Radio is meant to be a digest of USL news and opinion. We're not going to be completely focused on the Canadian teams in the show. It will be designed as a show that looks at the whole of USL, including the American teams. It's going to look at USL as its own entity rather than just a Canadian situation. Obviously, Kevin and I, being in Montreal and Toronto, and having intended to go to these games, are going to have more of an understanding of those teams.
And not gonna lie, having connection in your part of TFC too, and myself, and it's going to be easier for us to get news and connections with those clubs. But we do intend to cover the whole league.
Yeah, and we're going to try and have a guest of the week. The format's going to be pretty simple. We're going to try and keep it tighter than we do Two Solitudes. I'm thinking 25 to 30 minutes, but Kevin and I, we tend to ramble, so that's face facts. It'll probably get to 40, but we are going to try and keep it tight so that it's digestible for you. We'll do a bit of a news wrap-up in each show because I know not everyone's going to be able to follow the league-wide as well as they want. We'll do a hyper-focus on one team or one issue each week, and we'll probably have one interview. We're going to aim to have an interview each week with someone from out of market. So that's going to be the format, and it's going to debut later today where we talk to Andrew Miller from Charleston. He was at the TFC2 debut game, so we're going to talk to him obviously a bit about what he thought of the TFC2 kids, but what he also thinks about it, just the general 2 teams coming in and what Charleston's role is in this league, what a standalone team's role, how that plays in their market. So we'll have a conversation with Andrew a little later on today, and you'll hear that later. We're going to it's going to have its own feed and all that sort of good stuff, and it has its own Twitter stuff out there right now. It's at USL Radio because we couldn't get radio because USL Radio is actually a thing, apparently. So at any rate, it's like an actual radio, like an old school radio.
It's an actual way to receive radio. Yeah, it's the technical term for how the radio actually works. So yeah, I thought that was funny.
Yeah, Kevin and I would like to say that we're smart enough to have known that before we named the show, but
let's just say that the first Google USL Radio search was really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. Double entendre there.
We're geniuses.
Yeah, all right. With no further ado, we're going to tag it on to the end of this show, though. So once we'll wrap up Two Solitudes, we'll sign it like we normally do. There'll be like a half-second beat delay, and then we're going to start the next the USL Radio debut. Will be immediately after this podcast if you normally download it this way, so you can test it out and decide from there whether you'd like to subscribe to the USL Radio feed. For those that want to just delete past that, then that's your choice. You can just download it separately if you want to do it that way, or you can listen to it all today. That'll only be once, maybe twice we'll do that, and then it'll eventually just move to its own feed. Anything else, Kevin?
No, it's going to be available as well everywhere our podcasts are available. So eventually it's going to have its own feed. We'll start it off by piggybacking it on the big brother of the Two Solitudes.
All right, and quickly, the social media, as I said before, is at USL RDO, like radio, like, the music streaming site, RDO, RDIO. And the Gmail is USL Soccer Radio is at gmail.com.
Exactly. A message out there if you're from a USL team out there, if you're part of any media out there, if you want to be on the show, if you want to be talking about your USL team, your plans, USL Soccer Radio at gmail.com.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll go back to the Canadian Review.
The Canadian Review on the Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast.
And welcome back to the Canadian Review here on the Two Solitudes podcast. I almost said the Five Rings podcast. Kevin, we do a lot of podcasts. It's not Five Rings, right?
No, it's not. We're talking about soccer. Talking about Major League Soccer, the Canadian teams.
Want to talk about soccer? All right. Toronto. How did Toronto do this weekend, Kevin?
They are undefeated this weekend. Wow, that's surprising to say that.
All right. The only thing I'm going to say about TFC this week, and then we're going to have it TFC free, basically. Why the hell did they have their bye week last week when it's an international break and the league knows damn well that TFC has two major U.S. national team players on it that are going to be unavailable? Oh, MLS, you make me crazy sometimes. Anyway, that's my end of my TFC talk. Kevin, Montreal, wasn't the most exciting game. I watched all that one, and it was, you tell me. What was your takeaway from it?
A result on the road, 0-0 draw. Asun Camara, 2 yellow cards, a reckless yellow card, the second one, unnecessary. He held the jersey while he was down, brought the attacker down, and he was already on a yellow. And you can tell midpoint during his foul, he realized that he was on a yellow. He should not have done that. And then he had a defender behind him to cover him anyway, so he didn't have to bring him down to stop a potential goal-scoring action. So basically, it was a little reckless game for Asun Kamara. So 2 yellows, he was out. But what we're taking about this 0-0 draw, what's the most important moment is, unfortunately, Montreal's darling, Montreal's new hero, who was starting his second straight game for the Montreal Impact as a lone striker, Mr. Cameron Porter, fell to a very harsh, very hard to watch injury. When he landed on his left leg, his knee buckled, everything buckled, and it looks like his ACL has been touched. The extent of the injury isn't known yet. We don't know if it's a tear, a bruise, a crushed ACL. We don't know. What we do know now that it seems like the ACL has been touched.
Yeah, look, I remember looking down at I was watching it on my phone because God love modern technology, but at any rate, and I was doing other things as well. So I was looking back and forth, and I happened to look just as I saw the knee buckle, and I was, whoa. It was, if you haven't seen the replay, don't.
You don't have to.
Yeah, it's not a fun-looking injury. It immediately, the assumption was immediately that it was season-ending. He comes back in October, but it's a really unfortunate injury for a kid that was having a great start and a great story.
But hey, better to have this injury when you're 21, though, when your body's able to heal stronger than before sometimes when it's those type of injuries, which is not the case when you're 30. So that's the only positive and that big negative, you could say.
Yeah, even that said, you're right. If it was all 4 ligaments went, front and side, then this is going to be a very long recovery, and he'll be lucky to be back next year. But at least he does have youth on his side, and you can hope for him that way. With him and Justin Mapp both out in back-to-back weeks, that's a lot of attack out too, and that has to worry people in Montreal, especially with the Champions League to factor in as well right now.
It does, and both injuries could have been avoided if you're asking me. I think the Justin Mapp injury was not aided by the conditions of the pitch in DC. The way he landed, the pitch didn't absorb the brunt of the shock when he landed. So it was actually his body, because of the condition of the pitch and the way he fell. It was a freak accident a bit, yes, but the conditions didn't help. And I think the same thing could be said for the conditions of the turf they were playing in. His leg got locked in, and the whole pressure was on the knee of the whole body. If it had been on regular grass, I think he would have slept. So yes, it was still rainy, so the pitch was still slippery, but I think a regular grass per pitch, that injury might not happen too. So it's a bad blow, yeah.
Yeah, it's, we've talked about many times about injury studies on field turf, so we'd be remiss if we didn't point out now that we just don't know scientifically whether that's the case, but certainly there were a lot of people that were trying to draw that conclusion immediately that it wasn't a turf injury. But then you looked at Mapp the week before, and you're saying it's a conditions end. It's not so much necessarily what kind of surface it is; it's the conditions of the surface at the time.
Yeah, it's just the fact that it was so slippery, but not only slippery, the grass was just falling off RFK. It was snowing 24 hours before, so basically it was just a loose patch of dirt and grass mixed together. And what happened? He got tackled and he fell in front front of him, and the way he fell, you just look at his elbow. But does it really happen on a pristine pitch? Who knows?
Yeah. But they got the point, and that has to be somewhat positive there. I do think that the impact now with two major offensive pieces out, even a rookie, he certainly was a big factor in the attack so far.
And Piatti was not playing in the weekend too, Duane, so they didn't have the same attacking flair that we've seen against Alajuelense. But at least they did rest a couple of pieces. That's encouraging, though, going forward.
Yeah, I do think that Montreal might be having to grind some results out early, but as we've said many times in the early weeks, you just don't want to get buried, and that's a result that helps you not get buried. Speaking of buried, New England's having quite the low start, aren't they?
Scoreless after 3 games.
Yeah, I was beginning to count down to for those that don't know, and if you're listening to this in Toronto, you know what the record is for the start of a season to go scoreless. It's TFC's initial season in 2007 where they went 5 games and 24 minutes. Well, 23 minutes, I guess. They scored in the 24th. So they have a ways to go yet before they start touching that record. But if they get through another clean sheet, I think TFC fans are going to start to be cheering against New England to get rid of that record. But anyway, we move on. Speaking of nearly scoreless, but then getting a goal.
Orlando, Vancouver.
Yeah, interesting game. Boring game, I thought. But I don't like Orlando. I've watched all 3 of their games so far. And I know a lot of people are high on them. I don't see it, but I do think that the one – well, obviously Kaká is a major factor. If he gets hurt, they're screwed because everything goes through him. And he is a brilliant player, maybe the best pure talent player in MLS right now. Now that Henry is gone, I think Kaká might have taken on that role. So certainly he is going to keep them in games by himself. And the other thing that's going to keep Orlando in games is the conditions down there. Even in the early season right now, Vancouver was just dead at the end. They were cramping up. They weren't able to get their same sort of offensive flow that they like, especially the game that they want. But yet, Rivero nicks another goal.
In dramatic fashion.
It was a nice goal too. The flick on and found the perfect space to hit it in. As I said, I was actually talking to a Vancouver fan, one of the ones that actually has a sense of humor. That was me to me, wasn't it? But the ones that don't take everything I say out of context. But at any rate,
I do not reflect the opinions of Duane Rollins.
Yeah, that I think Rivero is a 1 in 10 player, and what I mean by that is he's going to score 1 goal for every 10 chances he creates. Now that's bad, but it's also good. He creates 10 chances a game, so he's also a 1 in 1 player. I don't think that Vancouver fans are going to care too much if he's scoring a goal a game if he misses 3 of them. But he does seem to be a guy that doesn't always finish his chances. So we'll have to watch that carefully as we move forward. But so far, so good. And certainly a very dramatic and important 3 points. 6 points after 3 games, especially after the disappointment against Toronto. That has to be something that Whitecap fans are excited about.
Exactly. And the fact that he has a sense for the dramatic, scoring either at the beginning of a game, like in his opener against Toronto, in 19th minutes into his debut, how he scores, or in extra time to get the win for Vancouver over the last couple of games, that gives Rivero a different status to the supporters. He's become already the superstar of the team after 3 games, and they needed that. That's exactly what Vancouver needed. That's what we said in the preview portions of the Two Solitudes, that they did need a superstar, and it seems like Rivero might be the one.
We're a little tight on time because we have an interview booked up against when we're talking about this. So we are going to keep the Canadian segment tight today. But I did want to quickly add one more thing. It's 2 back-to-back clean sheets for the Whitecaps, albeit against not the best competition, 2 of the Eastern's bottom teams, in my opinion. But that still has to build confidence for what we both believe to be their true weakness this year. And that's a little bit of questions in the middle of that defensive line.
But so far, so good.
So far, so good. Okay, we're going to wrap at this point now. As I said, after a brief little 2-second pause, you'll hear us jump in with the theme music of USL Radio. That will be the debut edition. If you don't want to listen to USL Radio, you can we'll say goodbye to you now. If you do, please listen to the show here, give it a chance, and after maybe one more week of tagging it on to the end of Two Solitudes, it will only be released on its own stream. But in the meantime, Kevin, I'll let you say goodbye to Two Solitudes, and we'll see you all in a minute when we come back with USL Radio.
Until next time, have a great soccer. And this is USL Radio with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie, the only show entirely dedicated to the USL.
And welcome to USL Radio. Not the Two Solitudes anymore, although we are attached to the Two Solitudes podcast. We are kind of affiliated with it. I am Duane Rollins here in Toronto, Kevin Laramie in Montreal. We are starting another podcast, Kevin.
We are USL Radio, the only show entirely dedicated to the coverage of the USL.
Absolutely. As Kevin just said, this show will be a USL show. Our other shows, well, we have Five Rings, which is a completely different animal, but our other show, Two Solitudes, is a MLS podcast with a Canadian soccer focus and perspective. This is a USL podcast. We're Canadians that follow Canadian teams and cover Canadian teams, but we're not going to focus only in on the Canadian teams. We are going to cover the league as a whole because there's a gap in the coverage, and I noticed this in the offseason when I was preparing for TFC2. And who better to do it than two guys that can do podcasts in their sleep and probably have.
Exactly. We're bringing our experience of covering soccer in Canada and covering amateur sports on a weekly and bi-weekly basis to the USL with coverage on USL Radio, of course, but as well with articles on Canadian soccer news. So the best place to get your coverage, if you're a USL fan across North America, is on Canadian Soccer News and on USL Radio.
And in terms of your written stuff, real quickly, CSN will have amped up coverage. Right now, if you look at the front page of Canadian Soccer News, it's almost entirely USL at the moment. There's no, well, TFC didn't play this weekend, so there's no TFC news on there. It's Team Montreal. Kevin covered the FC Montreal-Ottawa scrimmage game. I covered TFC2. There's lots of good information there. Michael out in Vancouver is doing a lot of work, has always done a lot of work talking to the prospects and the academy kids, which are moving into that USL Pro team. So basically, CSN will have a hyper-focus on the three Canadian MLS reserve teams or second teams or USL teams. It's going to have to get that terminology down because not everyone's happy with it. But the second teams, the two teams. But then on this show, we will do the rest of the league. And I think that's enough banter about what we're doing. Let's just do it now, Kevin.
Absolutely. I think the best way to do it, we get somebody from Charleston that's been covering the league for a decade. Charleston being a mainstay of the lower level of soccer in North America. I remember the Impact used to play them often back in the NASL. Now they're in the USL, and it's interesting to see his difference of opinion because he's in a standalone team towards to the two teams. So it's very interesting, Duane.
Yeah, Andrew Miller, he writes for the Charleston Post and Courier. As Kevin just said, he covered the team for 10 years. So let's just take a break now, bring Andrew on. We're going to have that chat. Then we're going to come back. Kevin and I are going to run another interview that Kevin took from his time in Montreal this past weekend. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some issues and wrap the show up for the week. And welcome back to our debut USL Radio edition here. Andrew Miller from the Charleston Post and Courier. The Charleston Post and Courier. I want to make sure I get that out there right. He has joined us. He's been covering the Charleston Battery for 10 years, so he's the perfect person to bring on to talk a bit about where USL is today and a little bit about the game on Saturday. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's touch on the game on the weekend real quickly because it does have a lot of interest to the listeners up my way. It was the debut of Toronto FC2, the reserve side or the USL side for Toronto FC. What was your overall perspective on the quality of the game and what the two team brought to the mix there on Saturday?
Well, I think if you're a Charleston Battery fan, I mean, you barely had time to sit in your seat and get a couple sips of beer, and you found yourself down 2-0 within 15 minutes. The first goal was a cracker. It was from distance, and I think it took not only the fans by surprise, but kind of the Charleston Battery defense by surprise as well. They kind of that was a shot from a good 25 or plus yards out, and I don't think anybody kind of expected that. So that kind of shocked everybody. And then just an opportunistic goal to put them up 2-0, and then if you're a Charleston Battery fan, you're thinking, gosh, golly gee, here I am. I barely had time to, munch on a couple of fries and have a couple sips of beer, and we're down 2-0, and not the way that they wanted to start. And to the Battery's credit, they didn't panic. They didn't they didn't do anything out of the ordinary. They just kept to their systems, Dane Kelly gets a goal a little bit before halftime, I think in the 38th minute. And then they find 2 goals in the second half off of set pieces, off a corner kick. So, there's been some question going into the season. How is the Battery going to score goals? Dane Kelly, obviously, is the focal point of that. He's been the striker there for going on now 4 seasons for the Battery. He's been one of their top scorers, especially when he's fit and when he's healthy. He's one of the more dynamic guys in the league, but are they going to get that secondary scoring from somebody else? I mean, that was the big question mark, I thought, going into the season, and they did it kind of through set pieces, through 2 middle defenders, getting the game winner right there in stoppage time from Taylor Bueller, and then Sean Ferguson gets one at about the 57, 58-minute mark there to kind of tie things up. So, for me, if you're a Charleston Battery fan, I think that's the biggest question that you got. Where's that secondary scoring going to come from? I think your defense is solid despite what happened in those first 15 minutes, because after that, Toronto really had a tough time generating any kind of sustained possession and sustained attack. So defensively, I still think they're pretty sound, but where are you going to get that secondary scoring from?
Yeah, Charleston's one of the standalone teams in the league and a long-standing team in the lower levels of American soccer. You've been around that team for 10 years now. Give our listeners that have never really been exposed to this level and understanding where Charleston is in terms of the local sporting scene down there, and just kind of what level of strength this team has moving forward in year after year.
Well, the USL has been kind of a conglomerate of a bunch of different leagues that have kind of come into the one umbrella league under the United Soccer Leagues. There is another league, the North American Soccer League. Actually, a couple of the guys that play for the Battery who are mainstays in their championship teams, the last 2, Colin Falvey and Nicky Patterson, play for Ottawa. I've talked to both those guys about the level of talent, because the NASL right now is considered the 2nd division and the USL is considered the 3rd division, although the USL is kind of applying for that 2nd division status because they're now affiliated with Major League Soccer. And when I was talking with Nicky and Colin about the talent level in the league as compared to USL, he feels like the NASL is a little bit more, it's an older league, guys with a little bit more experience, but he doesn't think it's as fast as the league. He thinks there are younger legs, obviously because of affiliations with the MLS, which started a couple of seasons ago. And I think eventually the USL is going to overtake the NASL as the Division II in United States soccer. I just think that affiliation with the MLS, even considering that the MLS teams are putting reserve teams in that league, I just think overall it's going to be the 2nd tier of soccer. And to me, the interesting thing that we're going to have to see over the next 3 or 4 years is how many teams in MLS put reserve teams in the USL, and how many teams go to straight affiliations. And because you guys are from Canada, you're probably all very familiar with this. I use the hockey scenario. How many teams are going to be, affiliated? Like the American Hockey League is affiliated with the National Hockey League. How many of those scenarios are we going to see, and then how many scenarios are we going to see where the MLS is going to just put reserve teams in? And I don't know that the MLS has really made up their mind on what they want to do and what's the best business model. It costs between $2 and $3 million to field a reserve or a MLS team in the USL. And do you want to invest that much money, or do you want to put 5, 6 guys in a USL team and have them affiliated with them and have them develop down there? And I think that's going to really, the USL and the Major League Soccer is really at a crossroads right now, and it will be interesting to see which way they go. And I can't tell you, I know there's a lot of strong feelings on both ways, that the MLS should really kind of be more affiliated based, and then there are MLS teams and MLS coaches and managers that just want to have their guys in the reserve league so they can have a kind of a closer eye on how they develop and how they're playing. But it'll be interesting to see over the next 3 or 4 years.
Like you were saying, Andrew, we in USL right now, there's teams like FC Montreal, Toronto 2, Vancouver 2, Seattle 2, Toronto, Portland 2, LA 2, a lot of 2 teams. Do you think there's going to be a divide or a certain rivalry between the 2 teams and standalone team like the Charleston Batteries or the other teams like the Batteries in this world?
I don't know that there'll be rivalries. I mean, geographically, let's say Atlanta gets a team in the MLS, which sounds like that's going to happen, and they put a reserve team in USL. Then I think, maybe geographically that could happen. But the problem there, the main thing with rivalries is, are there going to be certain players that are going to kind of carry over year to year to year to year? And that to me, geographically, and that scenario, that's what kind of creates a rivalry to me, because there are teams like Richmond and Charleston that have played each other forever. They have a nice little rivalry. Wilmington and Charleston have a nice little rivalry going. But I don't see USL teams having rivalries with the reserve teams in the MLS, the Toronto FC2s, because I just don't think that there'll be enough. A, they're not geographically located near each other, and then B, there's just not enough carryover players that play from year to year. They kind of have grudges against guys and a history with other guys, and I just don't think that's going to be a rivalry per se. So no, I don't think that will happen unless geographically you get teams closer together. Like, you have Orlando and Atlanta, say, and then they can maybe have a little rivalry with Charleston. I can see that happening.
I'll give you an example of what Montreal is doing with the league, and I'll ask your opinion about it after. Montreal is bringing a team of 20-year-olds on average. It's basically the same team they had in the PDL system in the last couple of months that's making the big leap to USL. And yes, they're throwing the kids into the deep end, but eventually they'll learn to swim. What do you think of that approach to forming basically an academy team for the USL?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the MLS teams have to figure out what's the best way to develop players, for their parent club, for the parent team. Is it going to be better for those kids to all play together in a system that everyone is familiar with? Basically, you're playing the same role on that USL team that you'd be playing in the MLS. I don't know. I mean, again, I think it comes down to business model and what's your idea of development and how you want your players to develop. Because you're right, when you're playing 18, 19, 20-year-olds against guys for the Battery who are 23, 24, 25, 26, you're basically playing boys or teenagers against men, and there's going to be that physical matchup that those young guys just can't overcome. You might have one or two guys that are physically mature enough and mentally mature enough to play against men, but you're not going to have a whole team of 20-year-olds, 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are going to be physically and mentally able to play against these guys. And again, it just comes back to the MLS teams and what is their theory? What is their, how do they want to see their players develop? Do they care about results? Do they care about keeping these guys together? Do they care about those guys playing the same role? And then on the reverse side of that, say you're sending 4 or 5 guys from an MLS team to a USL team who's your affiliate. Well, those aren't your coaches in the USL team, and they might not be playing the same system you're playing. And the prospect that they want developed, say, at outside, an outside defender, but you got him playing inside, or you got him playing, on the wing in the midfield, or you got him playing up top. And so a role that you wouldn't have him pegged for in the MLS, he's got a totally different role in the USL. And are you okay with that? I mean, those are the things that I think individual teams and individual managers and coaches, they have to figure out what they want to do and what works best for them and their organization.
Andrew, I think the second goal, Charleston's second goal on Saturday, sort of illustrates the difference in that physicality. Scramble in the box. The young keeper, Alex Bono, sort of was overwhelmed. A little bit of contact that might have been called the foul at a younger age. Suddenly the ball's in the back of the net, and it sort of illustrates, I think, the problem that the two teams are going to have. Do you think that at the end of the day that when the season shakes out, that it's going to be the standalone, those older teams that are standing at the top of the heap, or do you think that the two teams will figure themselves out and grow as the season goes on?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think it's kind of too early. Not to dodge the question, I think it's a little bit too early to answer that because I haven't seen all the MLS teams that are down here yet. But I would think, and what I don't think that people understand is it's not so much the physical grind, but it's the mental grind. I mean, these kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, they're going to be playing for an entire summer. There's travel involved. There's training involved, and how are their bodies going to hold up against playing against guys who are, bigger and stronger? There are 2 or 3 guys from the Battery team that are on their international team. So I mean, they're getting kind of international experience as well. the last time in 2001, and this is 3 championships ago, for the Charleston Battery. In 2001, when they won the A-League championship, I will say right now that team, while it couldn't have won the MLS, it would have been in the upper middle part of the MLS. And that's the way that the Battery kind of recruited their players, that they were older, stronger, faster, had lots of international and pro experience. And you just don't realize how huge of a factor that can be. Being a professional, knowing how to take care of your body and act like a professional is sometimes as important as the talent that you have, the pace that you have, the ability to pass and shoot and score and stuff like that. I think knowing how to be a professional is as important as sometimes the skill level and the athletic ability that you have.
I think so far, from an MLS perspective, the great story, the best story they have is Dom Dwyer, who, of course, played most of his season for Orlando. I ended up going back playing the championship game for Orlando, and then excelled for Kansas City, played in the MLS Cup final that year in the championship season. Do you think that having the chance to see guys that break out, that are young guys that maybe become MLS standouts, is something that excites the typical USL fan? Is that something that's sustainable that can help grow that league?
Well, yeah, I do think that. And to me, you brought that example. The biggest example of a guy who excelled in USL and has now gone on just being, an absolute star in the MLS is Osvaldo Alonso, who played for the Charleston Battery. I mean, I can't think of a guy who's come from the USL who's as good or Duane De Rosario too. I mean, he's obviously been a very good player in the MLS level too. But Osvaldo, who's a guy that I watched play the year that he was here. He defected from Cuba, came here. Nobody knew anything about him, and he has been absolutely probably the premier holding midfielder in MLS for the last at least 2 or 3 seasons. And had he, if Cuba ever lets him, kind of get out of his Cuban citizenship and FIFA ends up, granting him an exemption, I mean, he would be your starting midfielder if you're on the U.S. national team at that holding midfielder position. So I think that, yes, that's something that USL fans can get behind. And, I knew him when he started here, and that. And Lamar Nail's another guy that plays for Seattle, that played here, that won an MVP, led the Battery to a championship, was the MVP of the USL when they beat Richmond for the USL 2 title in 2010, I believe. And I mean, so those are already examples of players who have developed here in the USL and have gone on to bigger and better things in MLS. So, yeah, I think fans in the USL get behind that, and I think that's what the MLS is looking for, is to develop those kind of players.
Andrew, can you tell the listeners how they can read your work?
Well, you can read me at thepostingcourier.com. That's all one word, POSTANDCOURIER.com. You can follow me at Twitter at AP_Miller_ at TNC.
All right, enjoy your season. You can't be I can't think of a better lifestyle than watching soccer games in Charleston. That's a beautiful part of the country down there.
It is beautiful, but it does get hot in June and July and August.
All right. You can come north and visit us then. All right. Thanks for your time today.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks again for Andrew for taking some time to be our first guest on USL Radio. I was going to come out of this segment and do a little bit of a joke about how we're going to talk about various radios and that are USL format, but I don't know enough about the radio world. I'm sure there probably is a podcast out there that does talk about literal USL radios, but if you've tuned into this one looking for that kind of talk, we're going to talk about soccer. Sorry, guys. Anyway, Kevin, what we're going to do now is Kevin was covered the Ottawa-Montreal game, the exhibition game, the friendly game, earlier this week. He had
there was nothing friendly about it, though. There was nothing friendly on the pitch about that game.
Well, yeah, Ottawa and Montreal, they have a bit of a rivalry there. Andrew talked about rivalries. Well, that's a geographical rivalry that goes back a while. You've got a lot of good things on the plate there, and I do hope to see I would love to see Ottawa and Edmonton start USL Pro teams too and get them in this job here. We talked about that on Two Solitudes today, but I think that's your perfect next evolution of that, and that would be good. I know USL has some very ambitious expansion plans. They're talking about 40, 50 teams even way down the road. So there certainly should be room for more Canadian teams and more geographical rivalries like that. But anyway, we digress. Gavin, you got some sound from a fellow that Philippe is his first name, and I'm going to let you say the last name. He's head of the academy down there, right?
Yep, Philippe Lafroy, head of the academy and coach of the FC Montreal, which is basically the top league of the academy, top team of the academy. And I think it's a very interesting approach to the USL itself.
All right, we're going to run that clip now, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about how different teams in USL are approaching USL differently.
So after your last preseason game, Philip, how do you think the team is going to fare off in 1 week from now? What do you take from today's game as at least one thing to bring to the future?
That when we are confident enough, we can challenge any team, I think, in this league. The problem is that we're still sometimes kids that they have to grow up very, very fast, because the first, let's say, 25-30 minutes, it was like kids against men. And then when they realize that they can challenge the men, then now it's more interesting for us. So what the positive thing is that when they took into consideration that they can challenge these type of guys technically and tactically, then we can do something very interesting.
So today we had the USL team versus an NASL team. There was a big size difference if you're looking at Montreal compared to Ottawa. Montreal does have some big size players, but they were injured for this week.
Yeah.
Do you think this is going to be a problem in the future, or do you think maybe size is overrated for in the soccer?
Size is overrated, definitively, and for us it's the talents, the physical aspect is more explosiveness type of things, and for us the physical challenge doesn't exist if your technical abilities and tactical abilities are good. You don't need a physical challenge because you're always ahead of the game and you have 1 second to do whatever you want. So you can release the ball before the physical challenge comes, and you can anticipate, you can make some interception of the ball. Then you don't really need a physical challenge. The challenge that you can maybe meet is in the air, because if you 5 feet and the other 6'6", then you have a problem. But we it doesn't mean we don't want, or we don't have very physical athletes. We have, but also we firmly believe that if your technical ability and tactical ability are good, physical aspect is secondary.
So today against an ASL team, Ottawa Fury, the goal was scored inside the first minute. So do you consider this game a 0-0 or a 1-0 loss?
Well, it's I think the Ottawa side will say it's a 1-0. In our side, we still say it's a 1-0 because again, if we're starting any of our game the same way we're starting this one, we're going to be into trouble. And instead, maybe of 1-0 will be 2-0. So it's a real 1-0. And we did not have a lot of opportunities, maybe one. So it's not obviously at the end. So obviously it's not enough. Even if it was 0-0, we didn't have any chance to score. So we have to be a bit more comfortable on the ball, better under pressure, and we don't forget that 6 months ago we're playing PDL. We saw this group and that. 100% of the team is composed of academy players. That the average is 20 years old. So we know that we're gonna face very big challenge at the beginning of the season. The thing is that we hope that they're gonna learn very fast, and after maybe 1-2 months, they're gonna be able to to look great like the last 25 minutes. I hope we're gonna see that during 90 minutes.
So basically, we're throwing them into the deep end, but they'll learn to swim eventually.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Looking forward to the season next week.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's it, Philippe. Bonne journée.
And it sounds like there's a lot of excitement around this initiative in the Montreal area. And Kevin, I think that Toronto's more towards the impact model. But if you look at what the model of what other teams are doing in USL, even the two teams, and we're going to focus this, we'll put the standalone teams aside for a second and just look at the two philosophies. They're very different. I think Montreal is the extreme of the youth side of things. Is that how you would like to see this being approached?
Actually, it is. Like I said earlier, Montreal's been really performed really well in the last couple of years in the PDL. And it seems like they were a level above where they were playing. And I think now it's the exact opposite. They're coming to USL being humble and having a team and a squad that's composed entirely of academy product, really not approaching it as a reserve league for the Impact, but more as a standalone team. And I think the name of itself, the FC Montreal, which is different than Impact 2, it could have been, but I think it really represents the philosophy behind it. It's a be-all, end-all for the academy. Yes, there's going to be some good product of the academy that are going to move on to be part of the Impact, but we all know that the percentage of that is about a handful of percentage a year that graduate to the first club. But at least having a team in the USL, it gives a professional environment, a place to play that is really competitive and has some advantages to be winning in that league and going to gather its own fan support. So I think that's going to really help the development of the players in itself, because it gives them the environment they need to grow, if that's the case, or just to have a decent career as a professional. There's not a shame of playing in the USL for 10 years. So I think it's a great idea that way.
Yeah, for those that aren't aware, like the FC Montreal lineup right now, it really is entirely academy grads. They have one guy from outside of Quebec. Outside of Quebec, I don't think they have anyone from Ontario. They might, but they're all
a couple. But there's a Swiss Fabio Morelli, who's from Switzerland, but it's been part of the academy for a couple of years.
Yeah, it's entirely local is what I'm trying to get at. They're guys that have been involved in the Impact system forever. There's not any draft picks there, right?
No, not yet, no.
Yeah, do you anticipate that there will be some supplementary players sent down to fill out the roster, or is this pretty much what it's going to be?
That's what I was thinking, but I was expecting to see Jonathan Grant in the weekend, but he wasn't present. He was still with the big club practicing, so that tells me that maybe they're going to treat USL separately, but who knows what the future has in store. Who knows, because we all know, we might think of it, there's no pressure of winning right now, but who knows what can happen if you're on a losing skid and one player from the big team is not playing enough, so you can put him in your 5 players that can play in the USL. We'll see what happened then, but the feeling I got is really that it's the academy's team. It's those group of players that have been together for years in the academy and in the PDL that finally have another system, another league to play in that's more competitive and that they can flourish more. Yes, there's going to be a size difference, but with their technical skills, eventually it's going to level up, and who knows what can happen then.
Yeah, for any new American listeners that we may have, you may not be aware that there is a quota requirement that the CSA has put forth for the Canadian USL teams. That quota is that the 50% plus one of the roster must be Canadian. That's not really going to be an issue for any of the 3 teams. Just by the nature of it, they're going to mostly be local kids. But the more interesting part of that quota is that 6 of the 11 starters must be Canadian. Over the course of a season, there has been talk that they're not going to do it on a game-by-game basis. If there's a lot of injuries in one particular game, or there's Canadian youth call-ups or something like that, they may allow for the odd game where they have to start 8 foreign players or what have you. But over the course of the year, that average is going to have to come out so that 6 of the 11 starters in every game were Canadian. So that is a different thing that the Canadian teams are facing, and one that we both on this show, on our other show especially, applaud, because I think it's needed from a development standpoint. Kevin, as I said, that's the extreme end of it. If you look at the middle ground end, which I'm going to call TFC, in terms of their development focus, they are playing some of the draft picks. And I did talk to Tim Bezbatchenko earlier in the year when they announced the launching of the team up in Vaughan, and asked him directly whether he drafted with USL in mind, and his answer was absolutely 100%. You can listen to that on our Two Solitudes feed. If you look back, you can hear that raw clip of the scrum where I did ask him that question. And when you looked at TFC's lineup for their first game against Charleston this weekend, you'll note at the back line especially, entirely the back line was mostly, and there was three of the guys on the back, including the keeper, were from the NASL. Sorry, the NCAA. I'm getting my N's and my acronyms mixed up here.
A lot of acronyms. USL, MLS, NCAA, NASL. That's a lot of acronyms.
Yeah, four of the 5 guys at the back were college players. One of them was a Canadian college player, which is interesting, a CIS player that was signed. The other 3, but the 3 that are most interesting to me that I'm going to highlight here were the 3 draft picks from TFC's draft this year. Simeon, Sharpie, and Bono, the keeper. If you read my story on Canadian Soccer News, you'll know what I thought about the keeper's debut. It was dreadful. And this is something that I'm not going to pull punches in this show either. When we are talking about professional athletes, young as they may be, they do need to be held accountable, and it really was not good enough on the first game. I think that he was at fault for at least 2 of the 3 goals, and that's just not something you're going to want from a keeper, especially a keeper as highly touted as Bono is. Or Bono. I think they're going with Bono, not Bono. It's not you two here.
But no, you're right, Duane, and I think it's important for us to say this on the first show, too. We are going to treat the 2 teams just like the other standalone teams in the USL, so what it means is they're professional teams. They are accountable for the result and their play on the pitch, and we're going to treat it as such as professional players going forward.
Absolutely. So they did. That was how they approached the backline. It was highly draft oriented. There is, a lot of thinking within the soccer world that you want your backline, your defenders, your keepers to be a little bit older. Although Bono is a 94, so he's hardly old. He's only 20. But the front line, the attack line, which did come out and do look like they're going to be dangerous this year and do look like they're going to score a goal in USL, is entirely academy based for TFC. You have, I'm just looking at the breakout here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their guys that started, and that includes Morgan, though. But 6 of the guys came directly from the academy to play in the USL, made their debut yesterday, or had played for Wilmington last year. Ashton Morgan, of course, was basically getting a conditioning stint down there because he hasn't played enough, and he probably will have to fill in for Morrow in Salt Lake next weekend. So he was getting a conditioning stint, or may get a few more of them down there because he just doesn't get time from the first team. We all know who Ashton Morgan is if you followed TFC for a while. But that's basically the philosophy that we're going with here, too. There's a big bulk of their skill player positions were young academy kids. A 17-year-old played in the second half. A lot of young guys there, and it really did show in the second half against Charleston, where they were an older team. And as Andrew said, sort of the grind of that wore on them, and they ended up losing that game 3-2 after they got the 2-0 lead. You compare that to Seattle, and I was looking at Seattle's lineup this year, and I think this is going to be an interesting sort of view. I think the Cascadian teams are going to put a higher amount of attention on winning right now and not just putting kids out there to sink or swim, and that's going to be a really interesting thing to look at this year.
You know, Duane, that in Seattle and Portland, you remember a couple years ago, Seattle had 60,000 people for a reserve league game? Well, it's going to be the case sometimes for Seattle, too. Just the fact that there's the offer and demand. In Seattle, the offer doesn't meet the demand. With Seattle, too, it bridged that gap, and there is going to be a lot of pressure to perform because a lot of people are going to be in the stand. We're talking about 30,000 is going to be probably for the Seattle 2 games. So it's going to be interesting to see how that affects the development, how it affects the approach of the USL games on a Seattle point of view. Portland is going to be the same on a smaller level a little bit, but it's going to be still the same. And if Seattle does something, Portland needs to follow suit. That rivalry will trickle down to the USL, and with Vancouver too being a third wheel saying, hey, I'm here, come on, I'm here, I want to be part of this, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, well, Seattle's going to play most of its games at their secondary stadium, but they will pack that place, and they did pack that place for the first game, and certainly I think if they're successful, you may very well see them play a game in the main stadium. But when I was looking at the team, and it's still young, I don't want to paint a picture of them being old or something like that, but they're
old in soccer term. They had experience. That's different.
Yeah, it's coming on to the average age of the starters was 21.6 for Seattle. Compare that to Toronto, and it was 20.6. So a year difference in there, and that's pretty considerable, especially when you take the outliers out and just sort of look at the medium age. Toronto had just a quick count here: 7 guys that were 94s or younger, or 6 guys that were 94s or younger, whereas Seattle only had 2 of them that fit that bill. Toronto had their opening day starters 4 guys that came from college. That includes the Canadian college player. Seattle had 8 guys that came from the NCAA. So that's kind of a different approach in how we're looking at these things here. In terms of pure homegrown twos, and I think this is an interesting one, Toronto had 8 homegrowns. I'm going to make sure I got that number right here. No, sorry, 7 homegrowns. Seattle had 2. So that's the difference in philosophy in how you're approaching this. They're slightly older, slightly more experienced. They've been playing the NCAA, which is going to be a similar level. Probably those guys mostly played PDL, which certainly gives them an idea of traveling around and things like that. Whereas the Canadian guys, boom, they're coming from League One Ontario in many cases, which their largest road trip would be to Windsor or Kingston from Toronto, which is a 3-hour drive for Kingston and about a 5-hour drive to Windsor, maybe 4.5, whatever. Not very long anyway, versus guys that are on planes. And that's a big difference, right?
It absolutely is.
Yeah. So, as you said, though, and I think I'll end it with the conversation with this, I do think, if you look at, let's go back to Montreal for a second. Montreal's not charging tickets for their games. That's an interesting choice, and one that I'm not sure the USL League office is entirely happy with, because I think they want them to be professional organizations and not be viewed as something less than that. Toronto FC is charging a very small amount. I don't think there's a lot being charged for those places like Portland and Seattle, but they're expecting big crowds there, and they're really pumping it and marketing it as its own initiative to try and get crowds out there. There's a lot more media attention. So that has an inherent pressure to win now. And I don't know whether winning now is the best for development in all cases if it affects how you make your lineup choices. Winning is part of development, especially at this age. Absolutely at this age it is. I remember talking to Mike Stefano from the TFC Academy last year many times about this, and how he would say, don't ignore the wins and losses, because at this level, when we're trying to get them to professionals, we need to be winning. We need to be putting into practice, practice to win at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So let's not ignore that. But if it's affecting your lineup choices, then maybe it is. So it's just, I'm not saying Seattle and Portland and all these guys are wrong. I'm not. But I'm saying it's something to watch.
Yeah, they're all on the same playing field. So the three philosophies that we described today are going to play each other on the field. And at the end of the day, at the end of the year, what's fun, there's a table, and we'll be able to see and quantify who was the best and who had the best result from the start till the end, and what happened in between. And that's why I'm really almost more interested in what's going to happen in the USL than anything else this year.
Yeah, it certainly is very interesting. You add the third part of that in there, and the fourth part if you wish, and that's the Charlestons of the world, the standalone teams.
Exactly.
And they represent their own community, and they have no other initiative other than they may want to sell a player on or to see one of their players graduate to a higher level, but primarily their motivation, their focus is about winning. So it's going to just be a fascinating watch. It's like a little experiment that's getting thrown in, and I think it's going to be a lot of excitement for those that like that kind of thing. If you don't know, you can watch all the games for free on YouTube too, guys. I don't know how many people don't realize that now, but you can. So this is a league that's really accessible, that is inexpensive when they are charging tickets. I think they're about $10 each in Toronto and Vancouver. They're free in Montreal. You can't get much more accessible than that. I guess you have to get the Metro up there, right?
Yeah, but that's just a small ask.
Yeah, so there you go. All right, let's wrap up for now. And as I said, we'll be doing this weekly. Attached on Mondays. Probably we'll end up getting out most Mondays is the date that we're looking at, right, Kevin?
Absolutely.
Okay. Kevin, say goodbye.
All right, so you can join us, USL Soccer Radio at gmail.com. If you want to be part of the show, if you want to email us with your opinion of the show, just let us know. Or on Twitter at USLRDIO, USLRDO. And until then, have a great soccer, people.